Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of Legends of LOR. Here today, we have a brand new guest, Walkabout.
Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Walkabout on Discord and Twitter. You might know me on in-game name. A little bit different, but here to talk with Dragon today.
Yeah, for sure. Walkabout's a pretty aggressive deck player, as well as being incredibly well-statted in real life. Do you want to talk about your card game experience? Introduce
Sure,
yourself.
yeah. So, middle school, I got into Magic the Gathering. So, of course, I'm a little bit of a CCG boomer. That was about 16 years ago. And even back then, I was an aggro player. Kind of progressed over to Hate Bears because, it goes hand in hand. If you like aggro, you hate control. And Hate Bears, if you don't know, is usually about efficiently costed units that come with some sort of prohibitive tax effect that make it harder for your opponents to interact with you or to combo out and channel out of spells together. So you maybe sacrifice a little bit of speed on the beatdown plan to make your opponent have no speed whatsoever. So I got out of Magic a couple years ago and moved to a new city, and then had time on my hands to get into LOR, and it's been a great time since.
Nice. Hearing you describe Hate Bears makes me understand a lot more about what one of your favorite cards in the game is.
Oh, Stony Suppressor, my beloved.
Yes. Yeah, Walkabout is a large proponent of the Stony Suppressor Petrosite Pillar game plan from a little while ago during the Seraphine meta.
Oh yeah, I built a deck with Lulu Poppy, and it was stacked with as many ways. Of course, we have the Stony Suppressor and Petrosite Pillar and Dark and Aegis as well, but I wanted to capitalize on having as many ways to challenge with a 4-power unit. So Lulu plus the bird, Poppy, or Lulu with Broadwing. Anything that I can use to kill Seraphine. It's not just about making their spells cost more. It's about making them feeling bad for playing the deck.
Yeah, it's not about winning the game. It's about crushing their will first.
Exactly.
You know what? That's a strategy I can get behind. But yeah. So speaking of some other fun stories, recently I was playing in ARAM with some other folks in the LOR community, and we happened to go up against the community manager, Riot Zero Nina, and because of that, I now have the fist bump icon, which I think was a really cool and fun experience. All it
Oh,
took was
wow.
getting absolutely farmed by his Zeri, which was quite scary because she was a good carry.
Oh, nice rhyme.
Yeah, thanks. I was playing Wukong that game, and I kind of couldn't get to him, so I kind of died, and then all of us died. But it was a fun time. It was really cool to see him in a game that wasn't LOR.
I have played exactly one non-bot game of League of Legends, and of course I played Draven. I did win, but I decided it wasn't for me.
You know what? That is a fair assessment of the game for you. So good for you. Although, hey, you know what? You still rep the discard archetype in League of Legends as well. So that's good for you there.
That's true. I can technically say that my highest mastery champ in both games is Draven.
True. Yeah. My Draven is really bad in League of Legends, so I don't play that there. And he's also really bad in Legends of Runeterra, so I don't play him here. And by that, I mean he's not as good as he was, so I don't play him.
Draven Scion is still playable, but a lot of the traditional discard decks that involve Jinx are definitely not. It's not exactly the most resilient deck. You used to be able to kill people on turn 2 back when Poro Cannon was still 0 and Rummage was 1 mana. There were definitely some ways. I mean, of course, it was sort of, a shot in the dark. You had to be a little bit lucky with your draws off of Rummage and getting the right things that you can discard to Poro Cannon. But if you see enough Scuttlers and copies of Vision, it was possible to get lethal on turn 2.
Dude, just thinking about how strong the discard package used to be compared to now is actually just insane. Like 1 mana Rummage, we have Challenger on our Twin Blade Revenant from Lost Soul.
Oh man, I miss challenging Vagar so bad.
Dude, it's really funny how Draven Sign was favored into Vigar into Darkness because of Twin Blade Revenant, and as soon as they switched it to Fearsome, it became unfavored again.
Yeah, I mean, it was always a very small margin of like 3 or 4%. I think I don't remember ever seeing it more than 5% favored one way or the other. So when it was Challenger, it was 5% favored for Scion, and when it was Fearsome, it was 5% favored for Darkness. I think you still have a lot of pretty resilient aggression in Draven Scion that you can beat down a Darkness player, and Scion is a pretty good threat unless they're on Minimorph.
Yeah, I will say Minimorph has fallen off a lot since in recent times for Vengeance.
Yeah, I really have not seen it in many Darkness lists. Actually, I see it much more often from Noxus Vandal control lists than I do from Darkness.
Yeah, I think most SI Bandle decks now are just on Vengeance instead. Because to be fair, I think most threats in the game are just fine to be Vengeance. It's like Anivia, Scion, and like Lee Sin are the main ones I'm thinking of for like where you're a little worse if you Vengeance them. Lee Sin mainly because of Deny.
Exactly.
But enough reminiscing about the past and old meta games and old competitive, because we got the new competitive with tournaments this weekend with the Runeterra Opens.
I had a great time at the Runeterra Opens. What did you end up bringing?
So I got sold on a pile, which was...
Oh boy.
So one of my friends, Vengevine, had this idea for a triple FTR lineup.
Okay, I know Vengevine. He's a cool guy.
Yeah, so it was traditional FTR. It was Targon Freljord FTR, and it was Noxus FTR with Swain Sedge. That was the one I liked the least. So I wound up switching that deck for Mono Rise. But I like the Targon version, and I just put Braum in instead of Zoe.
I think Swain Sejuani can be a deck, but I don't necessarily think it's good as a ramp deck that wants to specifically play FTR. If you're just playing it like another Noxus control list that maybe runs like Blighted Ravine or something like that to flip Swain pretty quickly, then that sounds like a deck, I guess. But
hey, it was beating the go wide stuff because we had all of the AoE cards, and then we also got to play Phlox and stuff, so that was cool.
yeah, it was pretty well rounded.
But I wound up not bringing that. I brought Mono Rise instead. So what did you end up bringing, Walk?
So I had a little bit of a plan in mind for my lineup. I wanted to play, of course, being me, aggressive lists, but I also wanted to bring aggressive lists that have some kind of top end, some kind of way to push damage through either high interaction decks with lots of pings, or Tristana style decks that don't need to interact with you as much. They just play a bunch of Grandfather Phase over and over and over, and you just can't push damage with a traditional wide deck. So with that in mind, I brought Plunder, Leona, Kale, Noxus, and a list that I had been working on. I've abandoned it since, but it did end up working out. Tristana Sivir. I figure if Tristana works for other people, it'll probably work for me. And Sivir gives me a unit that is resilient to removal, as well as the Absolver, which lets me push damage through other Tristana decks, especially because Tristana is so easy to level and fulfill the Absolver's conditions.
Yeah, makes sense to me. I was just targeting broad main piles, honestly. I'm like, all right, we're going to play 3 bigger decks, and 2 of them play She Who Wanders, and the other deck is Rise, so have fun, opponent.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So how did those decks work out for you?
Well, first off, I didn't play at all the first day. I wound up being a little bit busy on Saturday, so I wound up just like not jamming any games the first day of the Open. But I got to be on the second day. I was able to jam in and get my games in, which I want to say I really like the flexibility of this compared to seasonals. Because I compare this to seasonal, this is like, all right, all of your games are on one day, and then you have to play them at specific times for the start. So you have to make sure you're free for that. Whereas for the Runeterra Opens, you can start whenever, and you can play your matches whenever. And if you want to take a break in between your games for a long time, you can. And if you want to just jam game after game, you don't have to wait in between rounds. Because I had a few situations where like I just destroyed my opponent in the first in like 2-0 them, and then I have to wait like 40 minutes for the next round. You know?
Yeah, exactly. That is definitely the biggest change for me. I'm a working class guy, and getting a weekend off is always, not always, rather, the most convenient thing for me or my coworkers. Now I'm working a job that's a lot more flexible. Back when seasonals was a thing, I would hear all sorts of groaning and whining about, Walkabout needs to get so and so day off for his poker tournament. They don't understand what LOR is, so they just call it whatever card game that they can identify with. It's a lot more flexible now, so I can play at my leisure. Now I have a job that's a little more on the go. I work my own hours, but still, even with that in mind, it's easy for me to say, I'm going to play a game now. Okay, let's do a little work. All right, play another game. And, just go back and forth and take things at my leisure. And I ended up getting it done by the end of the day on the first day, and I did get to all 9 wins, which was, pretty nice. I was happy with that. But it was something that I was able to space out without stressing out too much and having to keep checking my phone every 5 seconds like I used to with seasonals, and then wait for that check-in button.
Yep. I completely agree. Just like being able to like take a break in between rounds if I wanted to do it was pretty nice. I think I played the first like 4 rounds that I took a break for eating dinner or something like that. Yeah, something along those lines. And then I finished off the rest of my games. So I did not go get to 9 wins. I had an interesting experience. So I did the really good at the start. I went 6-0, and then I just couldn't get a win, and I just got 0-3'd. And I finished 6-3.
I almost had a similar experience. I was actually 8-0, which was pretty incredible. I was feeling pretty confident. And then, for most of those 8 rounds, I didn't see too many players that I knew. I know a lot of people have talked about the variance in skill level, whereas with seasonals, you have players that are at least playing actively on ladder or seeing some success in gauntlet. So they're, competent, maybe pretty good at the least. There were some slightly easier games, but the last few I saw a few names that I recognized, and things almost didn't go to plan. But we got there at 9-2.
Nice. Yeah, I don't think I really saw any names I recognized. Some of the opponents were less skilled than what I'm used to in seasonals, but I still had a pretty decent competition margin. Also, I think bringing Targon FTR may or may not have been the play. I will say I had fun playing the deck, but sometimes it just didn't win the game, and that was not ideal, I have to say.
It's really generous of you to play with a handicap. I'm sure your opponents appreciate it.
The last 3 definitely did when they. But I mean, I was just wanted to play some decks I was having fun with more so than wanted to play the best decks in the game right now, because I want to play some decks that I enjoy if I'm going to be stuck playing them for 9 rounds. And I figured since this one doesn't really have as many stakes involved for them, because this is just a test, so the really only thing you're getting is trophies for this Runeterra Open.
Right, of course. And that's why I brought a deck that was still kind of in testing at the time. Yeah. I was thinking, worst case scenario, I find out pretty quickly if the deck is worth playing or not. And it worked out. The deck is still bad, don't get me wrong. But in that scenario, it worked out.
I mean, what do you feel like was common? What felt more meta in that environment versus what you maybe see less of in ladder?
Oh, I mean, there was definitely quite a bit of Rise that I was seeing while I was playing. I know that because I banned it every single time. Also, there was a surprising amount of Red Gwen that I saw on the tournament, because I really hadn't been seeing that much Red Gwen in my other gameplay, but I think I saw it like 3 or 4 times in my run. So that was a bit surprising.
I don't see so much Red Gwen, although it's weird to me that the deck has kind of vanished, because I think the deck hasn't had any functionality
nerfs. They've changed stats on a lot of cards in the deck, but they haven't changed mana costs, and they haven't done any reworks. The actual strategic lines of play available to the deck have not changed, really. Like, Katarina having 1 less point of power is not a huge deal on a unit that disappears as soon as it hits you. It's not as if it makes it easier to trade up or anything like that. I mean, I guess there's definitely some scenarios like Quietus kills her now. Troll Chant can mess up her attack, stuff like that. But I'm kind of shocked it's disappeared. I saw a lot of Pink Alawi. In fact, I think I saw it in half of my games. Someone brought Pink Alawi.
I saw a disproportionate amount of Pink Alawi as well.
Yeah, and that's like kind of what I'm talking about. I mean, it's not unplayed on ladder. Like, it's definitely a known deck. It's a solid, powerful deck that it's arguably a pretty high tier deck. But I saw it disproportionately way more in this event, and I'm wondering if maybe that's just because the region pairing has a lot of flexibility in terms of what sort of answers you can bring. Because Bilgewater Ionia is definitely one of those region pairings where you can make people real sweaty with the best of 3 one-ofs.
Yeah, for sure. Plus, like, if your opponent can't deal with the first tentacle quickly enough, you can kind of just snowball the game. And that happened to me a few times where, like, I had to ban. There's some games where I think it was like up against Rise and Pink Alawi. They banned Rise. They played their tentacle. They got out of avalanche range, and my FTR decks kind of couldn't deal with it anymore. Because now they had like Syncopation to protect Revengeance. They had Deny to stop Buried in Ice. So
yeah, it's definitely a deck that can punish anything that's trying to use sweepers or cheap pings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought doesn't work as well when there's a Broadmane in play. But if your opponent isn't a psychopath and doesn't bring triple Broadmane, I'm sure it's a pretty decent strategy.
Triple Broadmane. That's really weird. That is a lineup that I've heard a lot about and that I have tried to plan against, but I don't see it that much. It's so weird how much people talk about the play rate of Broadmane. I just somehow am dodging it. I think I saw it once today on ladder.
I will say, I think one of the main reasons for that is that triple Broadmane isn't that good. Because while there are like 1 or 2 really good Broadmane decks, the third Broadmane deck isn't really that great. Like PNZ Noxus is a pretty good one. And then we have Pandal City with Nora. We have that one as the second one. But the third one isn't as good as those. Because like Bilgewater, while it sounds good in theory, it's like doesn't has not been putting up the same results as the other 2. And then SI is bad because then you're a catalog deck, and catalog is famously even worse at closing out the game.
Oh man, I love when people play 4-mana landmarks that don't block against me. Please.
Yeah, and then you're like, oh dude, when your opponent's going for the go hard route, it's always a fun experience.
A miserable experience.
Hey man, I had to play against Spooky Karma round 2, and let me tell you, I think my timer got to almost 0 minutes that game.
Ugh. No, thank you. I think 4LW was the one who popularized the newer iteration of Spooky Karma with Yi Karma.
Yes. I will say, I think that Opulent Foyer was an excellent addition to the deck, because it gives you an amount of aggression so you're not just sitting there dying. And it can help you grow your Yi to level him up faster if he ever comes down and shows his face. But the thing is that decks still take 1,000 years to win the game. But back to talking about the Runeterra Open. I like you said, flexible schedule was definitely something I liked. I thought that was pretty cool. I liked being able to play against a random assortment opponents. But that's kind of similar to the experience we already had from seasonals. Although I will say I like that it had access to more people, so it's a lot more accessible to everyone. So I thought that was really cool because building up the competitive scene, getting more people involved, that's something I always appreciate doing.
I 100% agree with that. I think a lot of the people that are really having an issue with the competition level, I think a lot of those people will be much more satisfied when we get to score-based matchmaking, which is what, Ruben has said on Twitter multiple times now, as far as I recall, that it'll go to more sort of a seasonals format in terms of that, where the 1-0s after the first round will get paired, and the 0-1s will get paired, and then the 2-0s, the 1-1s, and the 0-2s, and so forth.
Yeah,
and,
I think Ruben has been a blessing for trying to get these kind of updates out, I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the communication has been more transparent than ever. And I know part of that's because it's a beta season, and there are a lot of questions and concerns from the community that need to be addressed. But I think that they've really rise to that occasion, which is great. No pun intended. I really think that the accessibility is a big deal. Like you mentioned, it'll get more people involved. I think having casual players get a better feel for competitive play is a big deal. And I think when we have a day 2, a lot of people won't mind. The best players are still going to be at the top. A lot of people complained about the LP changes, making it easier to get to Masters. But at the end of the day, you can still tell who's a good player because the people that are in the top 50 or whatever, benchmark you want to use are the same players.
Yeah, and I mean, hey, you're talking about the large number of people getting to Masters. I mean, one thing to remember is that, like, when we had, even with that large number of people in Masters, like, almost half of the players in Masters had, like, 15 or less LP.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I think I was, like, top 700 last season with, like, 150 LP, which is 10 wins. It just showed you that, like, while you can get there, it can be hard to climb in Masters.
Yeah, exactly. I think some people complained that the quality of games had gone down because there were so many players in Masters now that maybe weren't of the usual quality. And, I get that if your main goal is to be in an environment where you're challenged and the level of competition is high and you can progress, I get it. But at the same time, even before that, ladder was never the big stakes environment. It was always about the grassroots tournaments and seasonals, and that's where the big matches were played. Like at Aegis, and Top Cut, that's where you would always see the highest quality play. And even before that, people were talking about how a lot of competitive players said they didn't really like playing ladder because there wasn't much incentive beyond getting either enough to make top 700, or if they were really confident, go for that top, that 8-1 seeding.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes people just want to have something to complain about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's like another thing with having more people in Masters means that there's more people to fill out games, which means you have a lower queue time. Honestly, when I play ladder, there's rarely a queue time because I'm not one of those people who plays at like 4 a.m. where I'm gonna guess there's might be a longer queue time then.
Well, that's when the OCE crowd logs in. I know it's time to log out whenever I queue into someone like Spide's actual good players. I think to myself, it's probably time to go to bed. Not just because I need sleep, but because I like my LP.
Your LP is not safe from the Australians and New Zealanders. I agree. That you see, that's when Eddie came out and farmed the entire ladder with sunk costs. I mean, the other 38 cards being Ari Cannon may or may not have been the reason, but it's actually sunk costs.
Yeah, I remember there was a point. It was probably 2 a.m. and I queued into Skathis playing Echo Zillion. I was fortunate that I won the game, but at the same time, I thought, what if I queue into this person again? Do I want that? I don't think I do. So, I went to bed.
Hey, but now we can get farmed during our hours by Ruben Zoo, who managed to get another 50-80 with, what was it? It was Travana Fiora this time?
Really? That's
I
crazy. I remember seeing the screenshot of the Fizz Yumi one. I did not know that he did another one. It's crazy. I have never queued in. I'm not sure if that's true. I don't think I've ever queued into Ruben.
Yeah, I've queued in him like once or twice, but it's also really cool to have like one of the main devs for the game is very passionate about the game and is obviously playing the game and farming all these so-called good players with his own brews.
Well, I mean, I think he would have top cut a seasonal easily by now if he were actually allowed to.
He's letting us have our fun until they let him loose. You see, guys, it turns out for Runeterra Opens, the final boss is actually Ruben Zoo.
Oh, that would be so unfortunate. Well, I'm sure he's gonna make Riot very happy when they no longer have to pay any prize money to any of our player base.
True. He will be doing them a service.
Yeah, it'll just go back into his paycheck. Or, if he has one. I don't know. Lore is a dead game after all.
True. LOR is dead. It's definitely not on an upswing right now with the competitive changes and all this other fun stuff going around. And a new variety patch coming in almost a little over a week now.
A little over a week. Is it that soon? I guess the season has been going for a few weeks now.
It's like March 1st. I believe the variety patch should contain a balance patch as well, so we should see a few nerfs as well to, like, Nora.
So, is it gonna be Nora? Is it gonna be? I don't know. I think Nora's level up condition is pretty easy. I don't really think you can mess with her stats.
Obviously, you can't really take away elusive. I think it's kind of like Bard in some ways, where the decks are definitely counterable, but there's some feels bad situations where your opponent rolls exactly what they need. I played against Nora Nar earlier, and they rolled 2 portals, and both of them were Dawn speakers. Yeah.
I think the funniest one is when they roll Stony Suppressor off their portals, but you're not playing a spells deck, so it hurts them more.
Oh yeah. Well, that's happened to me too. Actually, quite recently, I won that game because of the Stony Suppressor on their field. But so they rolled double Dawn speakers at the exact same time on my attack token, which kind of made the game for me. And they group shotted one of their own units to get the trigger, which was hilarious. You know, I applaud the creativity, but it was definitely a feels bad moment on the RNG.
Yeah,
And
I can definitely see an aspect of the portal package at least getting nerfed. I think something from there is probably too good and has to go. Could be Portapalooza, could be Junk Construct, could be Nora herself.
yeah, I think Junk Construct is probably the strongest part of that package
I agree.
in terms of the game's, the game plan of the deck to be able to flood the board and move from being sort of, value based, maybe some cheap early interaction, into finishing your opponent with a wide board in the late game after you've accumulated enough portals. I think Junk Construct is a little bit too much early game value, and it makes it so that the window for actually pushing any kind of early damage is just too narrow. Unless you're playing Fearsums or Overwhelm, something specifically designed to push through wide boards like that, traditional aggro decks just can't really do a whole lot against Junk Construct. Like, you swing into them, they get a portal, they get another unit. Like, they've automatically 2-for-1 you, progress their champ. It's a little bit too much value. I think making him a 2-1, so at least maybe you could, even aggro decks run something like Pokey Stick, right?
Yeah, making
that
him
might
more.
let you get into some
Oh,
damage.
all right. Speaking of that, though, hear me out. What about making Nora a 2-1 instead of being a
Now,
1-2?
that is an interesting idea. 1-2 is definitely an interesting stat line. She's deceivingly resilient, at least in
Yeah,
the sense that it's hard to stop her from hitting you once.
yeah. It's like a lot of decks run pings. Far fewer decks run 2 damage. Do you think about there's a lot of pokey sticks, group shots, blades, edges, vile feast, stuff like that running around. There's
Oh,
a
tons
lot
of it.
less mystic shot.
Yeah,
than that card.
it's. I think it's Quietus specifically in this meta that's common enough to answer Nora. The problem is that a lot of the decks that run Quietus also run Nora. So Viego Nora is a deck, and then that's kind of what it comes down to. There aren't too many decks that can really jam Mystic Shot and feel good about answering Nora. Because a lot
Yeah.
of the ones that do are maybe, say, like a burn deck. I guess there's the PNZ Broadmain list, but I think that's not as good as the Bandle Broadmain deck, and then you don't have Mystic Shot.
Yep.
So it's an awkward state. I think some of it is partly the meta. Some of it is maybe Nora needs to be handled a little bit. It's hard to say because I think it's a lot harder to balance champs the lower the mana cost.
Yeah,
Because
for sure.
as you go up in mana cost, it's easy to look at some things and say, like, we'll adjust their cost, and we'll compensate by maybe giving them +1 to a stat. So I know a lot of people are not in love with the Viego change, but they increased his cost because he's a medium, a higher cost champ,
Yep.
and they gave him a stat buff. That's a good example. With Nora, it's hard to make an adjustment that doesn't make her, irrelevant.
Yeah.
So if you do something like give her -1 HP, suddenly she's just never connecting ever again.
Yeah.
Even if you make her a 2-1, she's never connecting ever again.
You know what? Easy answer. -1 power. There we go.
Oh man, they gotta get you on the round table.
Yeah.
Making her a 3-mana 2/2, that's another idea maybe, but then you have the issue of the portal value coming too late, and maybe the deck's game plan slows down too much. It's like similar to Lucian. He came back a little bit early on in the first week after his adjustment to 1 mana, and then people realized actually it being a 1 HP unit does matter, and we're in a meta with a ton of pings. And it's actually kind of hard to set up Lucian and actually get away with it.
Lucian was already hard to level up before. Now he's like, unless your opponent's not running interaction or they tap out, you're probably not leveling him. So it's better to play him as like a value unit or something like that. But I'm excited to see what we have in store, especially if we're getting new cards for some archetypes that haven't seen play in a while. I am excited for that. But I think we are about out of time for today, so I think this is a good time to wrap up. Thank you very much for coming on today, Walk.
Oh, of course. One last thing for the wrap up. One archetype we'd like to see get some support in the next variety patch.
Well, mine is probably going to be the ramp archetype. I know. I mean, I don't mean like the cards that ramp you. I mean the payoffs, because I would like a new ramp payoff. Because let me tell you, Warden of the Tribes ain't it, Chief.
Okay. I would like to see maybe something more on the aggressive side of Nightfall. I think it's a more skill-rewarding, aggressive deck with some pretty cool combo-ish, very synergistic plays that has kind of fallen to the wayside in favor of the beefier Daybreak rework.
Yeah, for sure. Now it's Nightfall that's the less played archetype among the two, whereas Daybreak was always in its shadow.
Exactly. All right, well, it was great to be on.
Hope you all have a great weekend, and we will see you all next week. Goodbye.